And I'll contact them and I'll say, can you please send on more photos? And they'll say, no, just come and visit. And I'm thinking, I'm a working mother of small children, and you live on the complete other side of town. I don't necessarily want to spend my whole morning to see an apartment that I could tell you from the photos isn't going to be a fit for us. Why don't you just send on a video?
Right.
And so that's been incredibly frustrating in the pursuit of it. And that's honestly why sometimes I lean into working with real estate agents, even though many Israelis would think that that's crazy and I should do all the legwork myself.
But this is my house, Mommy. The one I asked Mr. Springer for. It is, I know it is.
Welcome to The Pursuit of Home, coming to you from New York City. This is real people buying real estate and their unique journey to get there. We share the tips, tricks, and frameworks to help you navigate the bumps in the road that you won't see on reality TV or social media, and which no one has talked about until now. Welcome back to The Pursuit of Home. I'm Scott Harris, your host. This episode is a departure from the American housing market. Wherever you're looking to buy, I can pretty much guarantee that it is not going to be the same as it is for this buyer that I interviewed today about her experience trying to find an apartment to buy in Tel Aviv, Israel. What is that experience like? Is it the same? Is it just as easy as opening up your app? Israel is pretty well known for its tech investment, its tech innovation. They have so many companies listed on the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ in America because they're this hub of all this new tech happening. But I don't know if it translates. We're going to have to find out in the episode. How does it help our buyer figure it out? And to help us unpack that, we're also going to bring on Daniel Frankenstein, who is the founder of a VC firm in New York that helps bring Israeli companies to America. So we're going to get a chance to really compare Israel's housing market to the U.S. housing market on today's episode of The Pursuit of Home.
The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
First things first, welcome back to the podcast. Today's a first for us because we're interviewing Alana. Hi, Alana.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Now, Alana, you're a buyer looking to find a new property, but you are looking in another country, namely Israel. And of course, since October 7, there is a lot going on in Israel, to say the least. I actually just got back there. I swear I've never seen more cranes than I did in Tel Aviv. And so it's not just the tough things that we're thinking about in Israel, but it's actually a lot of real estate happening as well. So I want to get into it because life goes on in a lot of ways, and maybe in some ways it doesn't. So let's talk about it. I know you live there full time with your husband and your children, and you're looking to buy a bigger apartment. Is that right?
That's correct.
And how long have you been looking? Because I know that you mentioned there are a lot of your friends are in the same boat and who can't find a home for a number of reasons. What's the ideal home that you and your husband would like to find?
Ideally, we were both raised in the center of big cities. I was raised in New York City, and I moved to Israel 10 years ago, and my husband's a native Tel Avivian, so we would prefer to be staying in the city center in an apartment. And ideally, we'd like to have an apartment with a master bedroom, a bedroom for each child, and then a home office, as we often work from home, and parking. And ideally that there would be an outdoor balcony, which is very common in Israel. But the thing that has changed for us since October 7th is we want to have a safe room within the apartment. Here it's called a mamad, so that if a siren goes off, now when it happened with October 7th, I had to run into the stairwell and there was a bomb shelter in our basement. But when you live on the top floor and you're carrying small children, that's very challenging. And it's a lot easier to have the safe room in the house, and you can just duck into it and make it one of the children's rooms so that they can sleep through the night if there are sirens or rockets.
Yeah, I don't want to let that entire comment, that what you just had to say, slip by, because people are mostly going to be listening to this in America. And the thought of having not only to figure out all of these very typical practical things, I want parking, I want a balcony, I want each of my kids to have a bedroom, but also to have to factor in, well, what if I've got a rocket siren coming? That's a pretty distracting, heavy thing to be adding to your checklist.
Yeah, I mean, it is bizarre that it's something I need to think about, but it is incredibly common here. And I've seen firsthand what a difference that it can make. I mean, my brother and sister-in-law and their two small daughters live in Ashdod, which is a city in the south of Israel, and they were under sustained rocket fire for close to a month after October 7th because they're near the Gaza border. And the mamad, the safe room, is one of the little girls' rooms, and the whole family truly like didn't. They barely left the room for a month, and it made a huge difference because then they were also close to the bathroom and to the kitchen. Then they had food supplies, and so it's just part of construction here. It's just part of life here, and it's a smart thing to have.
So that's a big challenge. But you also mentioned that one of the biggest challenges of looking for a home in Israel, which is like one of the centers of high tech everywhere in the world, is that there's not a centralized marketplace like there might be in any city in America. There's not a multiple listing service. There's not even, it sounds like, not even a functioning brokerage community where people share information. So what do you have?
Right. So that's, as someone who grew up in Manhattan, where there are so many outstanding real estate agents, such as yourself. It came as a shock to me. It feels often like I'm in the wild, wild west of real estate. There is a website called Yad Shtaim, YAD2 dot I think co.il, and that's kind of, it's, I guess it's the equivalent to an American Craigslist. Israelis hate paying for things, and so they don't want to. They like Yad Shtaim because it allows them to list things for free and go without an agent. There are a bunch of agents that I've met that largely cater to the expat community to help them find apartments and to help them with the process here. And I believe that for those that want high-end apartments or homes, companies like Sotheby's does have a real estate wing. But a lot of it's done word to mouth or listings on both Facebook and Yad Shtaim.
So do you think this works better in other cities in Israel? Because you've obviously been looking for a while and haven't found anything, or is it just that Tel Aviv's too hot a real estate market, or does it not work that well anywhere in terms of people not being able to actually have a list and a way to really look at easily for properties?
The joke about Tel Aviv real estate is that it's twice the price for half the space.
Okay.
And I think that is not the case in other areas, even close to Tel Aviv, like Givatayim or Bat Yam or Holon. And I think that what happens, or Ramat Aviv is another popular suburb. I have to say, though, that I think that landscape is going to change really quickly because they're right now building the metro around Israel. And, living places that now would take me an hour to get to with a commute, within the next 5 or so years, I'll be able to access within about 10 minutes on the metro. And I think that that's really going to change where people decide to live. So I think that there are bigger apartments, there are private homes with gardens that can be found outside of Tel Aviv with far greater ease. Tel Aviv has, the beach, an incredible food scene, lots of nightclubs, lots of cultural goings on, and everyone wants to come and live here, understandably. But I think that the market is very, very saturated, largely due to a lot of expats that come to live here.
But also, it sounds like people, like everywhere else, they want their commute to be decent, and if there's a change there, it definitely it's going to alter people's math. But I do want to get back to this idea that, okay, this is the original epicenter of negotiation, and maybe everybody thinks that they're such a good negotiator, but if you walk around homes, if you were walking around a marketplace trying to buy tomatoes or something like that in a market in Israel, you can go to 5 or 6 or 10 different stands and you know what people are charging. How do people figure out how much something is worth if there's not a centralized place where you can see what things sell for, what things are asking, and even get a sense of how many apartments or homes are on the market? How do you figure that out?
I truly don't know. I would say that at this point in time, I've spent months and months looking for an apartment. And I would say that I've seen a consistency in the price per square footage and when it comes with certain extras versus without others. So I I am seeing similar trends in in the marketplace, but I don't know how it's priced.
But when we were speaking earlier, you also mentioned that a couple things. Since the war started, that construction has gotten crazy expensive because the entire pool of people doing construction are either in army or they can't actually come into the city to do work. And at the same time, that's kept, in some cases, a lot of properties on the market for a longer time.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a chance that the prices are actually coming down? Or is it that people are just going to wait around for things to pick back up at some point in the future? I guess my question is, how do you know when the market's moving up? How do you know when the market's moving down? Other than just every single buyer has to do the grunt work themselves.
I don't know the answer to that specifically, but I would say that, when there's a sustained conflict like there has been over the past 7 months, that the marketplace, actually today's exactly 7 months since October 7th, that there was a drop. It now is a good time to be buying if someone wants to be buying, because I am seeing drops in prices on things.
Interesting. Yeah. We were having this conversation in America during COVID, and people were saying, figuratively, this is this is a terrible time, but it's actually a terrible time in a lot of cases, even today, maybe even worse. I don't know if you're aware, but the conversation is actually very relevant in America, because right now there's a lot of questions about who is going to pay buyer agents, who's going to pay. It's going to disrupt the model potentially for the way buyer agents are paid in America. Is it the same? Is it a situation where if a buyer agent comes to you and says, I found this, that you have to sign an exclusive agreement with them, or do you actually work with lots of different agents?
That's correct. Before any agent will show you a property, you have to sign an agreement that they have the exclusive on it and that you'll be paying them whatever their set commission is. I can't see the property before I sign off on that.
And how you also mentioned that when you're looking online for properties, sometimes they're not even pictures, not floor plans. Maybe it's a picture of like half a wall. So you're signing this document. It becomes a lot of steps just to see something that you might not like. Is that right?
Hello?
Yep.
It's been maddening. I'm so accustomed to how things are done in the U.S. where, I go on Zillow or I'm trying to think of a comparative website, but Redfin.
That's the big one, yeah.
Where every listing comes with a floor plan. They come with schools in the area. They come with pictures of the building, every room from every angle, the view from the windows. And here, people will post an apartment on Yad Shtaim with, as you said, like I'll have a darkened kitchen, and I'll contact them and I'll say, can you please send on more photos? And they'll say, no, just come and visit. And I'm thinking, I'm a working mother of small children, and you live on the complete other side of town. I don't necessarily want to spend my whole morning to see an apartment that I could tell you from the photos isn't going to be a fit for us. Why don't you just send on a video? Right. And so that's been incredibly frustrating in the pursuit of it. And that's honestly why sometimes I lean into working with real estate agents, even though many Israelis would think that that's crazy and I should do all the legwork myself through Yad Shtaim, which is that at least the agents have greater success at finding pictures and having showtime set up. So it's really, that's why I keep referring to it the wild, wild west of real estate in this country. It's really crazy.
Yeah, tech entrepreneurs out there, take note. There is a market opportunity here, I believe.
Please.
And you also mentioned when we were speaking before that in the case of real estate in Israel, a lot of families will be helping their children buy real estate. I mean, it happens here with down payments as well, but why do you think that is? I mean, I've heard that the rental prices relative to the cost of buying in Israel is very stark. Are people buying just to use properties? Are they investing in them? And how is that pushing against you mentioned it you touched on it a little bit, but do you think that the kind of just people buying to use it for themselves is getting in the way of you buying this as well?
Okay, so there are a few different parts to my answers. So one, I hope that this is coming through in this interview, which is that I've had an enormous amount of culture shock in my real estate adventures here, that things are done really differently. But something that came as a surprise to me is that it's incredibly commonplace for parents to help their grown children to buy their first homes. It's done, and it's almost to the point that it's expected. And the reason that I think that it's come to be like this is because Israel's in close proximity to Europe, and the European Jews, let's say, I'll take for example French Jews, they're earning income on the euro, and they have a lot more money to spending money due to their income. They're a 5-hour flight from Israel. They have 8 weeks of vacation a year. So they take their money, and the weather here is gorgeous compared to France. So they go ahead and they buy the $2 million apartment as like a pied-à-terre, as a weekend home for their families with an easy flight away, like the equivalent of New Yorkers flying to Florida. And then the Israelis are priced out of buying those apartments, and it drives up the price of the apartments because they can't compete with the U.S. dollar, with the euro, with the pound, and all of a sudden the Israelis can't afford their own real estate, and then they have to lean into parents, grandparents to help them with purchases of homes that they plan on living in full time.
And you also mentioned something in passing that I thought was pretty interesting when we spoke before, that sometimes parents who are living in Tel Aviv give their apartments to their kids and then move to some place a little bit out. It's like moving to Florida in the United States or something.
Yes.
Is that commonplace?
I can't tell you the statistics of how often that's happening, but it's certainly something I've heard about on numerous occasions. Like a friend of mine, his parents had bought the home in Tel Aviv 30 years ago. And after my friend got married, the parents gave the apartment to the son, and then they moved to a suburb. Rather than to help with the down payment, they gave him the apartment, and the groom and his new bride paid to renovate the apartment to their taste. So, I've heard things like that have happened, or parents selling, let's say, the family home in Haifa, and then giving kind of an early inheritance to all the children to help them buy that first home, and the parents live in a simpler home as a way of helping out the family. I've heard many stories like that.
Well, it doesn't sound like the culture shock or your maybe lack of experience in Israeli real estate is really counting against you. It sounds like everybody's having a challenge because everybody seems to want to be owning real estate there. Is that right?
I would say yes, but I would say that a big thing about being, it's called being an Olam, that I'm an immigrant to the country, is that I don't have the same sort of social network or social connections as someone that has a buddy from second grade and went to the army here and, has a lot of cousins here. I'm really coming and often fending for myself in a very different way than those people that have been raised here. So when I go to look for an apartment, I don't have a buddy to call up for help. That's why I think I lean more into real estate agents, because I need assistance in figuring this part out. And there's a lot of cultural differences of how things are done here that I need some help navigating.
Well, it sounds like there's a real opportunity to build out a marketplace where there's a little more transparency, and I think it sounds like with the lack of inventory, it probably benefits everyone. But Alana, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, that was my conversation with a buyer in Israel. And, I wanted to take this chance to compare the U.S. real estate market with the Israeli real estate market and kind of point out where there really isn't a functioning market, so to speak, in Israel. So what better way to bridge the gap than to talk about other innovation in Israel, how it's helped the U.S., maybe what innovation, might help Israel itself. So after the break, we're going to bring on Daniel Frankenstein, who's the founder and partner of Jewel Ventures, which is a VC fund that helps bring Israel startups to the U.S. market. So stick around, and we'll be right back to talk about the challenges.
This podcast is supported by the More Network, powered by Brown Harris Stevens. Real estate touches every aspect of our lives, from design and architecture to investing and the economy. Now there's a way to get all your real estate information in one place. The More Network. With more than 20 podcast and webcast series, the Mastery of Real Estate Network is powered by Brown Harris Stevens, one of the country's most distinguished brokerages. Discover advice from notable entrepreneurs, compelling topics, and access to top global real estate experts. Subscribe to their YouTube and Apple podcast channels by visiting getmorenetwork.com.
Okay, we're back. Again, I was shocked to see that an area so well known for its startup culture has this weird cobbled together system for finding a home to buy and that it doesn't work well. So in order to understand this, I am so delighted to bring on my friend and also expert on Israel in many ways, Daniel Frankenstein of Jewel Ventures. Daniel, welcome to the podcast.
Scott, thank you so much for having me, and just appreciate the chance to have this conversation and to be with you.
Well, let's get right into it. I know that there's a lot going on in Israel that has nothing to do with the housing market, and It would be strange of us not to at least acknowledge that. But, Israel's not just some tiny country the size of New Jersey, right? It packs a huge punch, both in the tech world, and it packs an outsized punch in terms of everybody looking at it. And it means a lot to so many people in America. I mean, look, according to Crunchbase, I did a little research. Singapore is the only other country that gets more investment capital on a per capita basis than Israel. It gets more than the US, UK, China, India. And, there have been books written about this, but how long have you been investing there? And what's helped the companies that you do invest in be successful in Israel and then ultimately in the US market?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I've been doing this a little over 14 years, which feels kind of crazy, actually. It's one day you wake up and you're part of the rest of your life. But I've been involved in the Israeli ecosystem for quite some time, and actually sort of in large part by accident, because it is an economy that punched so far above its weight. I originally was sent to Israel by a New York Stock Exchange traded company called the Corporate Executive Board back in 2009. It's not a name people would know today because they were acquired by Gartner in 2017. But one of the reasons that they sent me to Israel to open a branch office for them was Israel has the third largest number of publicly traded businesses in the United States for a foreign country. That's just behind Canada and China. So in terms of,
Wow.
of data that shows that there's a whole lot going on in this small area, there's a lot of real data to back that up. So a lot going on in Israel. Israel graduates twice the number of engineers and scientists per capita every year as we do in the United States. You mentioned that per capita venture dollars getting raised. That's also huge. And two other components that create a really incredible ecosystem in Israel. Number one is the education system. Israel has an unbelievable education system that's largely free because they're mostly public institutions, which means that students who graduate from Israeli universities don't actually, typically have debt like we do in the United States. So you're freer to be an entrepreneur. But before you go to university in Israel, you have your compulsory military service. And what most folks don't realize is that a vast majority of the people that serve in the Israeli army are not actually doing what you might think of an army would do. They're doing their military service behind a computer, intelligence, cybersecurity, cyber warfare. So there's so much going on in that ecosystem, so much happening that really does create, this unbelievable talent pool, and that's the talent pool that attracts the capital. To your last question, in terms of how those companies end up here in the United States, Israel is a small country. So while there's great talent and it's a great place to start a company, it's not a great place to build a big company. It's not a great place to be a category maker. And so you have to credibly build your business for export. Which is also an interesting dynamic of that ecosystem, where the entire ecosystem is literally built for export. But coming to the U.S. is not an easy thing. And it requires getting over a cultural gap. It requires getting over a language gap. And in certain cases, a regulatory gap. So that's kind of where we sit. We exist in that gap, helping the best entrepreneurs that are building very particular types of businesses enter the U.S. market effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I want to try to zoom in like into why I was so interested to have you on, which is to kind of look at this bizarre, to me, like this situation where you have so many brilliant people not able to solve what seems like a problem that's been solved in America. And, you know, I guess so the question really is, there's always got to be a working test case somewhere. So these entrepreneurs, they're going to probably start in their home country in Israel. I mean, do they, or I would imagine, okay, let's see if there's a there. You know, aren't some of them already trying to solve issues in a real estate market in Israel? Or, I mean, because you're focused, I know, not just on like, it's not medical tech, it's all software based, right?
Sure.
So these are things that they see a problem, they try to hit software. And in this case, real estate, there's so many ways that people use their phones to look around for real estate. You know, what's being done now or
Sure.
Yeah.
So you bring up a really important point, and it's actually one of my big learnings from, you know, having been doing this for 14 plus years. You know, so first and foremost, just to give you the lay of the land, we focus on B2B software businesses, cybersecurity, data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the digitization of legacy infrastructure. And in certain cases, Israel can be a great beta testing environment where, you know, you sort of test your technology with an Israeli company and then make sure it's ready for the bright lights of the US market. In other cases, it actually is a terrible test market where whether it's the regulatory environment or how certain sectors work, it actually doesn't give you any indication of whether your product has relevance in the United States. And by the way, I think that's where some of the challenges are that you're mentioning is, you know, we have a very different real estate market in the United States, and you obviously are the expert there. We have different land use issues. We have different, you know, the regulatory environment's different. So those are places that make it really hard to translate between the two. You know, I could definitely give you examples of places where we've been burned a little bit, or places where we actually found great deal opportunity because of the inability to validate in Israel. But I think it's a harder transition sometimes than I think people realize.
Well, you know, thank you for saying that. I mean, it's as I look at it, it's like, wait a minute, this should be so easy. But, you know, obviously there are things that I'm not thinking about in terms of regulatory. But, you know, I did hear something. I was talking to a woman who actually builds buildings in Israel earlier today. And she says, you know, when I heard that in New York, it only takes 2.5 years to build a building, I'm like, wow, that's so short. When I know in Israel, it could take 10 years. But
Yeah.
we're not even talking about, you know, the building of houses. We're just talking about just the buyer who wants to buy a house and the seller who wants to market the house and get the best price. I would say this to try to get even deeper in, like historically, the real estate industry has been pretty famously resistant to innovation here, you know, and tech at the same time is like really improved the way people buy and sell, you know, their experience of finding homes here. Why do you think it hasn't happened in Israel? Because I mean, all of these experiences, I realize you're focused on B2B, so business to business.
Yeah.
This is like a B2C, right? Business to consumer. But what do you think's in the way to creating like a better functioning real estate market? You heard the buyer talk about how it's literally like a Facebook group and it's like Craigslist. It's like Web 1.0 trying to operate today. She can't even see pictures of a property online, right?
Yeah.
What do you think the issue is?
And by the way, it's funny you say that too, because, you know, I have friends and family that are Americans who live in Israel now, and they just have this unbelievable frustration with trying to buy a place because there's no pricing discovery. There's no like one source of truth when it comes to like data and price per square foot. And it's almost like a shook, as they say, a Middle Eastern market. And by the way, there's a reason for that. Okay. So, you know, and I think this is very an interesting point to make is, you know, and part of the reason why we don't do B2C investments, you know, sort of business to consumer, is because those are highly cultural in terms of what people adopt. There is a different culture in Israel than there is in the United States, and part of that reason is that a majority of Israelis are indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa. So it's not the same culture that we have here in the U.S. And by the way, it's not the same culture that American Jews have in the U.S. either. So it's a very interesting, different cultural dynamic, and I think that part of it plays into that as well. I think the other reason is talent, and this might be slightly controversial, but we have so many examples here in the United States of really talented people going into real estate and making a phenomenal living doing that. In Israel, because it's a smaller country and because it's a smaller economy, most of the great, phenomenal talent gets scooped up into the tech industry. And there isn't as much left over to be sort of an individual entrepreneur or an individual contributor in the world of real estate. There's the big, real estate firms, and there are the big folks who do, some of the construction and some of the design build stuff, and some of the bigger projects. But there isn't that same entry point for your most talented people. And I think that is part of the reason why you just haven't had a lot going on to innovate in that sector.
Well, there's a lot in there that I might want to, I don't want to say I want to push back on,
Please.
But I would say culturally in America, most people are not accustomed to negotiating about everything except real estate, right? It's the one place where haggling is expected, right? So it seems like it'd be a component where, it's innovated here. It's just an asking price, and then the negotiation happens from there. So that's just something I want to maybe put a placeholder on. But then the other thing you talked about was that that maybe real estate sales are not attracting the best and the brightest. Is that that's kind of what you were getting at?
That's exactly what I was saying.
Okay. So I think that's been true. If you really look at, and I'm not trying to, be mean to the real estate industry, but, the reputation of most real estate agents, even today, I mean, there are a lot of lawsuits going on actually against the brokerage industry. I think you could see a lot of people who would say, yeah, the reputation of the brokerage industry today here in America is also not known as the best and the brightest people in terms of salespeople. And of course, I'm the exception, of course.
Always.
But I would say that, yeah, I mean, the innovation is driven by the tech. It would be driven by people who saw a need, not necessarily the real estate professionals themselves, right?
Well, yeah, and so two things I'll say to that. First, absolutely, it's the folks who see a need who are in a best position to innovate, but they also have to have the skill set to build it correctly, right? And it's actually one of the things we look for when we do a deal is domain expertise. It's really easy to look on the outside of an industry and say, hey, I have the silver bullet to fix that industry. It's a lot harder to do that and know exactly where to go, without you being, of the domain and really understanding the domain. Okay. The second thing is I would say that negotiation is a core competence of the Israeli ecosystem in every respect. Uh-huh. However, the outcome of a negotiation is very different in Israel versus in the U.S. In the U.S., we are culturally ingrained to look for our win-win. In Israel, it's a zero-sum game. It's I win, you lose. And that's a really tough way to create buyer-seller harmony, I would imagine. If one person has to feel like the winner and therefore one of the people has to feel like the loser.
That's a huge, by the way, that is a very, if you're out there listening, that's something you want to spend some time thinking about, because there was a comment that the buyer that I was speaking to, I don't know if it made it into the recording. I can't remember, but we talked about this idea of a sucker, the word I think in Hebrew was friar.
That's the word.
I know buyers, you want to get a great deal, and that makes sense. But to your point, it's not like there are people that want to, I say, like, you want to rip somebody's face off. I might not be By
Yeah.
the way, the real estate market is not very well known for producing these opportunities to ever get the most screaming deal. And even if you have a great deal, you don't necessarily know it when it's happening.
Sure.
And, sometimes you think it's a great deal, then later on it turns out not to be.
And,
So
and by the way, same in the tech world, by the way. And ultimately when and we, it's part of what we try to instill in the businesses we back is that there is a win-win out there. And that's a real thing to aspire to. And that this age-old I win, you lose mentality only means everybody loses at the end of the day. And so, I think that's also a place where there's still, it's getting better. There's still some ways to go, but I can see that being, a challenging dynamic, where you're trying to get two sides to feel good about the outcome.
yeah, that is, you really, I think you zoomed right in on it. And it sounds to me like the biggest barrier then is trust. Right. I mean, there's already, even in America, there's a big issue around real estate, negotiating with trust here. And if you're going into every negotiation thinking either I'm going to win this or I'm the sucker,
Yep.
then, that probably is the biggest barrier. So let's, I think we've solved it, right? We know what the problem is, but
We're done.
on the margins though, at the very least, as we try to instill some kind of sense of, hey man, if real estate market's going to function here better, there's going to have to be some win-wins. There's still that point where you can do price discovery. And that's something that tech is really good at, right? Like data, analyzing data, at least getting closing price data, in Israel for a real estate startup. I mean, are there some regulatory issues, or is there a way for somebody to at least help buyers and sellers know the price discovery in their real estate market? I mean, could that be a first step?
I mean, absolutely. I'm a big believer in general that the more information that you provide people, then they can make better decisions and there's less secrecy in certain areas. I will say, it is something we also struggle with in the venture world, because most of the data that we have access to is actually self-reported.
You're talking about like what people invest and like how companies are being valued?
How companies are being valued, the size of an investment round, a venture firm's performance, how much cash they've distributed back, what's their IRR, when a company sells, what was the actual sale price? Did one of the investors at the top of the pref stack have some crazy liquidation preference where the founders made no money? There's lots of things where you see a headline.
You just threw a whole bunch of words that many
Sorry,
people
I apologize.
No idea what you're talking about. That's okay. I'm basically, the point is like there's a lot of information that may not be clear, and even if the price is a certain thing, there's a lot more to it than. Yeah.
No, and the equivalent in your world would be, when somebody you list the price of a rental, and you don't list that maybe the tenant got 2 months free, so that the actual so like you have like data that's like information, but is it instructive to the reality? Not always. And so I think that's part of it. I also think, ultimately you have to have an industry that desires that type of transparency. And I think at the moment there's some incentive, to sort of not have that transparency. And I think that allows the existing players, to keep newer entrants out of their market, right? Because the moment you have more transparency, the moment you have, sort of open source data sets that anybody with any amount of technology acumen can build products around, suddenly, you take these cottage industries and you put them at risk. And so I do think there's some degree of call it protectionism going on.
Interesting.
But I think ultimately the demand's going to be there because, half the entrepreneurs we back are Israelis that came to the U.S. for business school, rolled out of a U.S. corporate, have rented an apartment in New York City, have rented an apartment in San Francisco, have bought a house in Tenafly. They see how it works, and then they go home, right?
Right. Like they can't even, they go home and they can't get Amazon. There's like all these things
Correct.
that they got used to, can't do at all there. Right.
That's exactly right.
Right.
And they can't go on Street Easy, and they can't look at stuff, and they can't. So, things will move.
Interesting. So I think my takeaway here is that we should be grateful as Americans to have this transparency and like a lot of functioning elements of a market that not everybody has everywhere. And
I mean, I would actually go one step further.
Okay.
And I would say that, a lot of the issues that I mentioned, things being zero sum, a lot of negotiating, that happens in Israel, but it's most certainly not unique to Israel. If you go to most parts of the world,
yeah,
there's a lot of zero sum negotiating going on. There's a lot of different cultural dynamics that make life and doing business a little harder, or in certain cases a lot harder. And I think that most folks don't appreciate that America is actually really built to work. Doesn't always work, doesn't always get you the outcome you want, but it is built to work. And there are things that work quite well here. Certainly, if you're grading us on a curve, very well.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for being on the podcast. If people want to find you, what's the best way to hit you up?
Send me an email, daniel@joulevc.com, JOULEVC.com, like the unit of measurement, the unit of work. We put in the work.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll see you next time, man. Good talking to you.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate you having me.
At first I was expecting that Daniel Frankenstein would have this answer. Okay, this is how we solve the housing crisis, the housing market problems in Israel with tech. And as we got talking, I realized that, wait a minute, this is not a very easy problem to solve, because in some ways you have this tech bubble, just like we have in America. You have this tech bubble that's solving problems within Israel, but it's almost surrounded by a lot of third world problems. And the zero sum game isn't going to go away with the snap of fingers or an app. What do you think? What do you think is the answer? The solution is demand going to be strong enough soon that there's going to be a solution that sort of gets imposed on a market that's kind of struggling still in the marketplace? I don't know, but I loved the conversation with the buyer to understand some of the nuances and the culture that goes on in Israel to find a home. And what I'm really left with is how grateful I am to be working in America, where we have this incredible, transparent housing market. And as challenging as it may be, and if you're a buyer, I know you're struggling at times. I see it every single day. It still has so much to offer here. This podcast is produced by the More Network at Brown Harris Stevens. And if you like what you hear, subscribe to our podcast, hit that like button on YouTube, and make sure you email us your questions. What do you want to learn about the housing market so that we can create episodes for you? And we look forward to presenting yet another episode of Real People Buying Real Estate wherever they are in the world next time. Real estate touches every aspect of our lives, from design and architecture to investing and the economy. Now there's a way to get all your real estate information in one place, the More Network. With more than 20 webcast series and podcasts, the Mastery of Real Estate Network is powered by Brown Harris Stevens, one of the country's most distinguished brokerages. Discover advice from notable entrepreneurs, compelling topics, and access top global real estate experts. Learn more about and subscribe to our YouTube and Apple podcasts by visiting getmorenetwork.com.